Thanks, Ruud, for a terrific presentation and setting up what will be the last of the plenary sessions for the CIP Forum. We're going to close on a topic that I think is of great interest, should be of great interest to all of us. Some of us here work in large corporations and are managing IP and dealing with senior executives. Some of us are service providers and do various different things related to intellectual property and are serving companies like that. Some of us are students at CIP and are going to be looking for jobs in corporations or in some sort of service providers, whether it's law firms or other places. And for every single one of us, this question is a critical one, an important one that the panel is going to discuss. The question that we've been asked here is, why does industry need IP management and fail to realize it? And so that's what we're going to talk about. I'm going to start with a story that I can tell in just a few sentences. Mark Blaxill and I are partners of a little firm called 3LP Advisors, and the reason Bo Hayden asked us to facilitate this session is because we wrote a book that's on IP strategy, and it's written not for IP people, although IP people tend to enjoy it, but it's written really for management, and so that's the reason why we were asked to moderate this. And we have a good friend, Damon Mateo, who many of you may know by name or reputation or personally. He's the Chief Intellectual Property Officer at Park. And we were having lunch with Damon a couple of weeks back and sort of talking about this issue about, why is it that it's so difficult to communicate important IP messages to senior executives. And he told me the story that he was sitting outside of a boardroom with a senior executive, not from Park, from another company, and started to try to open a conversation with him about, IP issues that his company was having. And the executive looked at him with this face, and Damon said, "I can only describe it as that cream spinach face. The face that a baby makes when you try to force feed them the cream spinach?" He said he got this look on his face and he said, "Patents? Are you talking about patents?" And so that's really what we're talking about, is that so often that's the kind of reaction we get when we talk about intellectual property with senior executives. So we're going to go right to the panel. I'm not going to do much more talking here other than to ask a few questions. What we're going to do is first introduce the panel, which I will do. I'm going to ask a couple questions to get it started. My hope is that this will turn into a conversation among the panel as opposed to a Q&A with the panel. And also, we're going to try to open it up to allow the audience here to participate as well and to ask a bunch of questions. Let me start off by just doing some introductions. You've already met Ruud, who runs IP. First of all, we have a terrific panel, in case you haven't recognized that. This is, in some ways, some of the members of the Jedi Council of the intellectual property world. I'll let you decide who's Yoda, but this is really a really terrific panel. So you've already met Ruud, requires no introduction. Béatrix de Russe runs intellectual property at Thomson, has been in this industry a very long time. Ian Harvey, who's currently the chairman of IPI, the Intellectual Property Institute, and was formerly the CEO of BTG. Kasim Alfalahi is running IP and licensing over at Ericsson, and my partner, Mark Blaxill. Mark has a bit of a different experience. Mark is a 25-year veteran at the Boston Consulting Group, and in that role as a senior vice president and the head of strategy there, has had a lot of experience with communicating with senior executives and board folks, and really that's one of the challenges that we have here. So I'm not going to say any more other than to open with a question. Our title here of our panel is, "Why does industry need intellectual property management? And why do they fail to realize it?" So let's try to parse that into two pieces. And the first question is, why do we need for senior managers to have IP management? And let me ask the question specifically this way. You hear different people express different opinions about what level of expertise the C-suite, the senior executives and boards need to have on intellectual property. I think it's a stretch to believe that the CEO is going to become an IP expert. So my question would be, to start off with, what level of expertise does the senior management really need to have as opposed to the heads of IP in organizations? And where do you draw the line between what senior management must do and what people who are running IP in businesses do? And I'll open that up to anyone who'd like to start.
Can I start?
Certainly.
I think you are perfectly right in that you should not expect that a board gains the same expertise and same insights in IP as you have. because that's why they hired you. So you need to advise them on the IP matters, and by doing that, over time they develop the basic knowledge about it. They understand it, and they understand not the tool in itself, how you get it, how you build it, but they understand how you can use it in practice, in commerce. And that, I think, is the major thing that they need to understand. And they don't need to understand how you get a patent. Yeah, of course, they need to understand that there's a difference between an application and a granted patent, but how you get it granted and all the stuff around that and all the litigation stuff, that's not relevant to them. Because they don't think in that way, and you cannot expect that they will absorb that all and that they can reproduce it and then can talk with you about that. That I think is not practical. The only thing that matters to them is how does IP play a role in business, what are the risks, what are the advantages, and how do we manage that?
I would go a little further than Ruud. I think that there are some basics which certainly chief executives need to have. When I hear the chief executive of a FTSE 500 company saying, I want to patent my trademark, there is a clear absence of understanding. When I started running BTG, I began to realize the chairman and chief executives of companies that I was talking to didn't really seem to understand intellectual property particularly well. So I started asking them a question, which is, what is the difference between patentability and freedom to use? Because I know a number of chief executives who got unstuck because of that. And in the running total in the last 20 years, 95% of chief executives don't know the answer to that question. Now, I would make the parallel with the kind of education you go through at business school. Chief executives aren't going to become accountants very often, but you need to know the difference between profit and cash flow so that you can have an intelligent discussion with your CFO. In the same way, you need to have, I think, the basic questions and understandings so you can have an intelligent discussion and know the right probing questions to be asking of your IP people. Clearly, you don't need to know any of the detail at all, but there are some questions you need to know and to be able to get some sense of whether the questions you're getting are the right ones, because you also need to know when to fire your intellectual property officer because you haven't got the right one. And I must say, I think that Philips was extraordinarily lucky to have Ruud Peters, the right person at the right time with a receptive CEO, because what Philips has achieved, I think, stands head and shoulders above any other company which I know. And as I said in a separate session yesterday, I don't know of any other company which has intellectual property as part of its regular board agenda. And I include that amongst the pharmaceutical industry, which 100% of their business depends on IP, and I don't know of a single pharmaceutical company which has IP as part of their regular agenda. So I think there are some basics which CEOs need to know so they can have that kind of discussion.
I tend to agree with you that, of course, they need to understand the difference between a patent and trademark and things like that, but that's so basic. But I think there are more companies that do report to the board, and I think one is sitting next to me.
I would like to comment on that. I'm going to give a few examples later, but as to your question, I fully agree with Ruud on everything he said, and I appreciate very much his presentation, which was by far the best I ever saw on this topic. As to the knowledge needed by a CEO or executive, senior executive members of the company, I think they need to have a basic knowledge. I think most of all, they need to be made aware of the risk of IP. They don't need to be made aware of what a patent, why you need patents and so on. Of course, that's the role of the CTO, of corporate research and so on. But as to the senior members of a company, they need to be made very well aware of the risk. They need to alert the IP organization as soon as they see a risk either in a joint development agreement or in merger and acquisition or in a potential litigation. I have seen examples at Thomson of letters received by BUs